The RideShare Guy es uno de los canales más importantes en el mundo del gig economy en inglés. Su fundador, Harry Campbell, se sentó conmigo a conversar sobre las incidencias de su entrevista con Tony Xu, el CEO de DoorDash. Hice un resumen de esta conversación y lo traduje al español, pero no podía dejar de compartir la conversación completa y en su idioma original. Disfrútenla. Harry, how are you, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm happy to be here talking to you, and I know we're going to have some value for the audience here.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm a big fan of your channel, and while my Spanish isn't great, we'll see if maybe I can even answer a question or two in Spanish for you. If your audience wants to watch on maybe half speed, since my answers will be a little slow.
We're gonna do our best to make it happen.
They'll need to speed it up, actually.
I already had Sergio, and we made it. So
All right.
I'm really positive about this. Well, you're here because you had this conversation with Tony Xu, and it was important for us as drivers. And I know the audience want to know about DoorDash, the behind the scenes of the company. And you were there, and the opportunity to have you here, and you can give us a little insight about that conversation. That is great. So the first question is a little behind the scenes of how the thing happened, and I'm curious.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it is funny, right? Because my whole business is called the Rideshare Guy. And, we're probably for sure best known for covering Uber and Lyft. And, I started driving for Uber and Lyft back in 2014. But, actually, I was probably one of the first dashers too in 2014 in Newport Beach, so Orange County, California. And, I signed up for DoorDash when they still did in-person orientation. So, we've always kind of been, dabbled in delivery, I guess you would say. And really over the past few years, when I saw, channels like yours exploding and others, covering DoorDash and delivery community, obviously we're not super well known. Like your channel is, obviously delivery TV, as the name would imply, right? Well known for delivery, but probably half of our traffic and half of our revenue too comes from delivery services, signing up new drivers, covering what it's like to do DoorDash, Uber Eats, Walmart Spark, as right? So, I think that obviously there's a lot of similarities and synergies. And so I think that was kind of the background on, kind of my experience with DoorDash and delivery. And I'm also happy too to, chat, logistically about how it happened too, because DoorDash did reach out to us about doing an interview, and somehow we finagled Tony Xu onto the podcast and YouTube channel, which I think was obviously a good get for us, and obviously everyone wants to hear from him.
Definitely, and the opportunity to have him there, and a little history. When I started doing delivery, not the channel, that was way long after that. But when I started doing deliveries, you were one of the channels that I started looking, because you were talking about rideshare, but that gave me like an awareness of how this business works. So it was good.
And so that's sort of what's funny, right? Because, the past 3 years, DoorDash has obviously exploded. I mean, there's a ton of YouTubers out there with, 10, 20, 40, 50,000 subscribers. And probably a lot of the videos that you do and other YouTubers probably do, get better views than we do, covering with 150,000 subscribers. But, we cover a little bit of Uber, a little bit of Lyft and delivery. And so, Uber and Lyft, I think, I don't know that there's many people out there that know rideshare and Uber and Lyft better than me, but there's a lot of people who know DoorDash better than me, yourself included, probably all the top 10 YouTubers. But at the same time, they may not have, I've been doing this for 10 years, right? And so like when I sat down with Tony, he definitely wasn't intimately aware of my business, how it worked, who our contributors were. But, I think he had probably heard the name before, the Rideshare Guy. And so, when his team approached him with the idea, because it was actually kind of me who pitched the idea to DoorDash. So the story is basically, DoorDash had this big 10-year anniversary, right? And a lot of times companies do this big fancy event and they announce new products and, try to generate a lot of positive press for the company, right? And so that was really the whole impetus of the event. And so their communications person, reached out to me, and I think I had emailed with her before in the past, but I really didn't know her too well. And, she had offered for me to come up to San Francisco. They would cover my flight and hotel, which is kind of a nice perk. So they weren't going to pay me directly, but obviously, it's not cheap to go to San Francisco. So that, I, at least in my mind, I knew they were serious, right? They're like, oh,
Yeah.
this is a big thing, this is a big event, and they wanted me to interview someone who was in charge of their Dasher program, who honestly probably would have been a really great guy to interview because he knew all the ins and outs and the details of
Hmm.
DoorDash. But I kind of thought in my head, like maybe a little bit selfishly, but also too, like I think Dashers don't know this guy, the guy who's in charge of Dashers. They want to hear from Tony Shu,
Yeah.
right? They want to hear from the big name, the CEO. And obviously, Tony is thinking about Dashers 24/7, right? No, just kidding. It's a big part of his job. But
Definitely.
um,
Yeah.
I knew that Dashers would, kind of, if they saw that, they would say, "Oh wow, Tony Shu, he's doing an interview for DoorDash, about dashing." And then also, frankly, me too. Like my knowledge of DoorDash, like I've been door dashing, I started door dashing when I was in 2014, right? So I know a lot about the system. So, I'm probably not the best person to go super in the weeds on a delivery app like DoorDash. I mean, first of all, there's DoorDash, there's Uber Eats, there's Walmart Spark. So there's a lot of them,
Hmm.
Uber and Lyft, I'm a good person to do that, but I'm not a good person to go super in the weeds. So just from kind of a logistics perspective, I thought that that was a reason where, hey, this is my shot. I should ask to interview Tony. And so that's what I did. I kind of asked to interview Tony, and they asked me for a list of topics that I wanted to cover with him. And,
Hmm.
it wasn't necessarily that I had to ask every single question, but, obviously they have this big product announcement. So they wanted to know, like, what the hell was I going to ask him about?
Of course. Yeah.
And so, I sort of sent over a list of, I talked to actually some of the YouTubers, like Pedro and, Sergio, and I reached out to a couple other delivery YouTubers. I mean, I have a good sense. It's always, people always want to make more money, deactivations, obviously with DoorDash, the sort of hidden tips and things like that. There's some specific orders. So, I put all of those questions in. Oversaturation of drivers, which I know you talked about in my video. So those were sort of all the topics, like basically the top 5 big things
Yeah.
that Dashers care about. And, I really pitched it to them. It's like, hey, let's piggyback off of this announcement you guys are making. Obviously, Tony wants to talk about this. I'm sure the team has spent, thousands of hours working on this and they're really excited. So like, let's use that as the starting point and then talk about these issues that Dashers, are dealing with. And so
Hmm.
that was kind of the pitch to them. And, I wouldn't say it took a lot of convincing, but, after a few days, they said, sure, we're in, let's do it.
The next day, after you launched
Mhm.
the interview, after you spoke with him, and when you were in your house, what was your perception of the interview?
Yeah.
The next day of the person, how do you feel? And yeah, what was the perception?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I will say that, this was my first time ever meeting or talking with Tony. And I mean, I guess I have seen him on Shark Tank, but that's about it. And, he does a lot of media interviews. He's always on CNBC and he's gone out on a bunch of investor and tech podcasts. But, in all of those interviews, he's always been talking to more of a professional or industry audience. I actually, honestly, I kind of pitched this to DoorDash because I thought it was a really good opportunity for him to be able to sit down with someone like me. Like, I've been doing this for 10 years. They know I'm
Hmm.
not going to get in there and attack him and ask crazy questions. And, they're going to be like, wow, this was a nightmare. We should have never done this. Like, they know that I'm going to be respectful and, I'll ask some tough questions, or at least in my mind. Right. But I'm not there to grill him for 45 minutes straight. Like, obviously they don't really want him doing that. And, so it's sort of like that fine line that you have to walk. But I thought it was a really good opportunity. I mean, how many Dashers have ever gotten to sit down and hear from the CEO of DoorDash for 40 minutes? I mean, we did a 40-minute interview, 40 minutes straight, all about everything from the founding of the company to features and products and things that he does. And, so that was kind of, to me, selfishly, it's obviously a good interview for me to be able to interview the DoorDash CEO, but I feel like they got at least half the value out of it too, right? Now that DoorDashers are out there able to see this, sort of very real interview. So my first impression of him was that I kind of, maybe because he's never done, that sort of Dasher, this was literally the first interview he's ever done for more than, 5 minutes, I would guess,
Hmm.
about what it's like to be a Dasher. I think my first impression of him was, or my sort of preconceived notion of him was that, he's the type that is more, very buttoned up, very good in front of investors, really tells a good story. He's on Shark Tank, he's got a great background, great founding story of the company. And so that was kind of my impression of him. And, when meeting him, he was definitely very smooth. He was really nice. He definitely, he wasn't the type, he didn't like come in and like, all right, let's get this over with and leave. So I sort of appreciated that because I feel like sometimes, these guys probably come into an interview and like, who the hell is this Harry guy? What does he do? Why is he important? Why am I
Hmm.
doing this 40-minute interview with him right now? And I didn't get that sense from him at all. So from that, perspective, I definitely respected him. And, I will say that, the interview, I mean, I thought went really well. He definitely had a few of his talking points that it seemed like he kind of came back to here and there. But I feel like for the most part, a lot of what he was saying was, whether you agree with it or not, it's what he actually believes. It wasn't like he was just reading off of a script. It didn't like, honestly, I don't know how much prep he did for the interview because it seemed like most of his answers were pretty organic, off the cuff, and that he wanted to be there and he was engaged. And I had originally told them maybe 25 to 30 minutes for the interview, and we were kind of getting down to the end, and I was sort of looking for signs from him, like, is he looking at his watch? Is he looking at his phone? Is he looking at the
Hmm.
clock? Does he want to leave? And I didn't get that at all. He seemed pretty happy to be there, and pretty, again, like I think he was really about everything. And I know that we can get into some of that passion and whether we agree with it or not, but I think to like, he definitely believes a lot, if not almost everything that he was saying. So that was kind of the impression and sort of my kind of takeaway. And sort of the last thing I would say, maybe I wouldn't know that this is a criticism, but I would say that like I do feel like with DoorDash is and food delivery is kind of unique because like we talked about in my interview with Tony, there's restaurants, merchants, right? There's customers, and then there's also dashers. So it's a
Yes.
three-sided marketplace. So it's like he's got three huge parties to think about to keep happy. And so I feel like from that perspective, I didn't get the sense from him that he's like in there every day, like thinking about what dashers are going through and dealing with. And I feel like he's much more like obviously dashers he cares about or not obviously, but I think he says that he cares about, and I believe him, but I think it's from a much higher level, right? Like I think other CEOs, like when I've interviewed Dara from Uber, I kind of got the sense that he was more like in the grind, like the kind of hey, here's this product feature that Uber drivers are dealing with. And from Tony, I kind of got he's a little higher level, and he has built a really good team around him that he's like, all right, I trust you, you guys go figure this out, here's the idea, here's how it fits into these other two pieces. And I think that's kind of a function of the fact that hey, there's like three people to keep happy in food delivery. So I think it makes sense from his perspective.
How do you see DoorDash right now?
I mean, I see DoorDash as sort of by far the best and most reliable earning opportunity across the country. I mean, I get emails from hundreds and thousands of drivers, and they're asking me about, oh, Uber or DoorDash or food delivery. What should I do here? Where should I do? And, I mean, I think there's no arguing with the fact, right? If you're delivering DoorDash, it's busy. They're operating everywhere in the United States. I guess not outside of the US, but, everywhere in the United States, and it's pretty big. And, for better or worse, right? Like if someone from Tulsa, Oklahoma asked me right now, who should they deliver for? And I had to pick one company with the gun to my head, I would say DoorDash. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of an easy choice. I'm not saying that they're the best company to work for. You're going to make, $50 an hour. I'm just saying that if you want to work in the gig economy and you want to deliver, here's the reality. And so I feel like from that perspective, that's kind of always where I see DoorDash. And, to me, they're kind of like the Uber of rideshare. DoorDash is, the Uber of food delivery, and, kind of biggest and best and most reliable, kind of the leader. They're the ones, doing this big 10-year anniversary, coming out with all of these, new initiatives. And, it wouldn't surprise me if other deliveries, delivery companies copied
Mhm.
DoorDash.
Well, talking about the company, and my
Mhm.
perception was this company is growing. This company is
Yeah.
strong, and they are going in different directions to keep up with what's going on right now in the market.
Yeah.
Not only restaurant, but also packages, and who knows what else we're gonna find from DoorDash. And rather you like it or not, or not, is the biggest. Is the biggest
Yeah.
company in
Well, and
delivery.
I mean, I think one thing that I identified about, 2, 3 years ago, I mean, we've always covered food delivery, but frankly, like we made no money off of food delivery and we didn't get much traffic compared to Uber and Lyft. And so, I had one contributor on my team. We called him Dash Bridges because he was DoorDash guy, right? And so he would do articles for us. And so we had a lot of this content that had just been, sort of fun to do. And, but it never really did that well relative to Uber and Lyft. It really all changed during the pandemic. And so, also too, I mean, I think if you look out at YouTube, right, all of these YouTubers that started popping up, over the past 3 years. I don't know who's friends or not friends, but obviously you've got Delivery TV, you've got Pedro, Nugs, this guy Bentley Coop, right, More Finance, all of these guys. I mean, I started seeing them do videos, and they would have 10, 20, 30,000 subscribers, which is not a lot, relatively, especially if you're trying to make a full-time income. I mean, it's kind of like a good start and you're getting traction, but like all the views on their videos were insane, tens of thousands of views, every release. So sort of what it told me is there's a ton of interest in DoorDash right now. It's growing, and the market, from a content, right? Because that's what I do now. I'm a content creator and running my content business, right? So what I saw was kind of like an imbalance. Like, hey, there's all these people that are interested in DoorDash over here, and there's just a handful of YouTube creators over here that are kind of right now they're doing a lot better, I think, relatively for their channel size. That in the future, I think there's going to be a dozens more, and I think that's sort of what we've seen. So I think kudos to you and others for kind of identifying that opportunity. But that's also something that I looked at. Tony had a couple stats, they announced that I thought were interesting. He said they've hired 13 million dashers,
Incredible,
over the
big
course of
amount
10 years. So they don't have 13 million right now, which I saw a couple of people mention, but so they probably got a few million right now, but 13 million people
in the
have worked for
history.
DoorDash
Yeah.
in its history. They've paid out over $35 billion over the past 10 years to dashers. And those are obviously like super, corporate talking points. But I mean, think about it. I was like, when he said that, I was like, well, that's a lot of people. I mean, there's 350 million people in the US, right? So,
Yeah,
a
but
few percent of the American population has worked for DoorDash at one point or another. So just to kind of reiterate on your comment, right? Like, this is a big company.
it is. It is a big company. After the interview, did you feel like, oh, I should make that question, or did you have any question that you wanted to ask but you didn't, and why? Like,
You
I mean,
know,
it is. As you mentioned a couple of minutes ago. If I have Tony Sue in front of me, of course I have to be respectful. I can say whatever,
yeah.
but if I'm in front of him and I want to interview him more than one time, for sure I have to be respectful with him. So sometimes if I have a list of questions, maybe I will feel like maybe this is not the right moment to do this question. Is there a
Yeah.
question that you didn't make, or you covered
Yeah.
everything that you wanted to cover?
That's a good point. And I mean, I think that like for any interviewer, it's always tough, right? Because you have to walk that fine line where, hey, if you're too hard on them, yeah, they are not going to do future interviews with you. And obviously me getting the DoorDash CEO on my channel is a great interview for me and my brand and makes me look good and all that, right? And so, kind of, but at the same time, right, if my whole reputation in the industry is this guy, sucks, and he asks all the easy questions every time the companies want, to put out good news, they go through his channel. Then it's not that valuable either, right, for the companies, because it's like I'm like a spokesperson for the company. So it's like I think it's really fun
Mm-hmm.
challenge for me to figure out, like, how do you walk that fine line where you can ask tough questions. And actually the metric that I sort of use is like, if everybody's a little mad at me, that's probably a good thing. If DoorDash was like, we didn't love this question, if drivers are like, Harry, you're a sellout, if some drivers, like, I just got an email from someone that was like, this interview was so great, and on my YouTube video probably the most upvoted comment is like, Harry, you're a sellout, right? And so it's like, as long as I think everyone is a little unhappy, like kind of a good compromise, the definition of a good compromise is like everyone's a little unhappy. If
Mm-hmm.
everyone's like, oh wow, you really gave it to Tony, DoorDash is probably like, wow, you're not going to get to interview this guy again, and vice versa. So I think that's like a fun challenge to figure out. But like the one thing that I actually did send them on my list of questions, like I wanted to bring up these sort of basically DoorDash hiding the tips, and it kind of didn't really come up organically during my interview with him. But also too, like, I've interviewed DoorDash's president Christopher Payne a few years ago, and
Yes.
that was like the main topic that I brought up. And we spent like eight or 9 minutes of a 30-minute interview talking about hidden tips 3 years ago. And I know most people probably weren't even DoorDashing back then or haven't watched, but I just feel, and like, I know it's a top issue, and these like low $2 orders or whatever it might be. And So I know that there's a couple big issues, but I think to me, like I kind of struggled with those ones. Like, first of all, do I want to kind of like ask that and rehash it again? I mean, and DoorDash was okay with me asking that. I mean, literally put it on my topics, to ask him. But I also like kind of know what Tony's answer is going to be, right? It's like, hey, why are you sending these $2 orders? He's like, well, we give, we now have earn by time, right? So if you don't like these $2 orders, you can kind of go by earn by time, and then it's, we compensate you for there. And obviously they do show, on the hidden tips, right? Like their whole answer to that question is, well, we don't want people cherry picking the best orders, and we, do show you the amount. It's not like we're paying you less, right? So obviously we know Dashers don't like it. So I think that the challenge sometimes with questions is like, I want to ask questions that I'm going to get good answers to. If I'm just going to get sort of the very standard I don't like to ask questions just because I know, these are topics that my audience wants to hear from. Like I want to ask questions that are new or that are interesting or engaging or that they haven't thought of. And, so with limited time, that was like probably the one area that honestly, I don't even think I regret not asking. Like if I did the interview over again, I'm pretty happy with the way I did the interview. I'd probably do it pretty much the exact same way. But if I were to ask additional questions, maybe it would be something around that. But honestly, I don't think his answer would be that satisfying or that great. But yeah, what do you think, Luis? What was there? Was there one or two questions you think I should have asked?
Well, I think, and this is another question that I have, because and we spoke about this a couple of days ago, and this is something that is for the community important. It's about the selling business, the account selling business, the
Yeah.
ID situation, people selling accounts,
Yeah.
people stealing IDs and making accounts with those IDs and selling those accounts, and that is a huge issue with the Hispanic community. And I am going to put another question, so I'm going to throw you two.
Sure.
The first one is that issue, and the other thing is about how RideShare guys see the amount of drivers, like USA drivers versus Hispanic community. The amounts. Do you have any idea of the biggest percentage of people who are from Hispanic community or
Got it.
US? That is two
Sure.
things that comes to my mind.
Yeah. No, I think the buying and selling of accounts would be definitely a good question that I could have asked Tony. I'm not sure, I feel like that's like quite under the radar, like huge. If you're like, there's these issues like if you're a dasher, like safety, and I think I touched
Safety.
briefly on safety, but like, things like driver safety and buying and selling of accounts, like the general public has no idea that any of that is going on, right? So I feel like those were topics where not that I was scared to ask, but I was just worried that like Tony wouldn't have great answers to that. And if I sent them to him ahead of time, like I don't think he's working on those types of issues, right? I feel like those are much down the chain. But yeah, I think it would have been good to ask him, and that's also too as like an interviewer, right? Sometimes you have like topics that you really want to hit on, and it's kind of hard to organically bring them up. It's like, okay, Tony, so tell me about, okay, so we talked about earn by time. Oh, by the way, totally random. What do you think about, buying and selling a fake
I
account,
see.
right? It's like, I kind of like, I like to do all of my interviews as a conversation, right? And casual, right? Kind of like, how we're talking right now. And so sometimes it's easier to work in certain topics, like, and other times it's more challenging. Like, right when we started the interview with Tony, I was kind of joking about asking him how to say his name. And, I've heard him talk about his founding and origin story, but I don't know if most Dashers like knew how the company got started. So, just like right to start the interview, within like 5 seconds, like I asked him a completely random question, just because I felt like that was like a good starting point, and, obviously like loosen him up a little. And, then he started talking about how like for the first 2 years of the company, he basically was a dasher, right? And I was like, oh, that was kind of interesting, so I kind of like those more organic, sort of real moments. So I think that would be a good one that I could have asked. I probably, it would have just been harder to like work it into the conversation, if that makes sense, which sometimes those are really good questions. And I don't know, I think in the future, I might do, sort of like, hey, here's like 3 to 5 like rapid fire questions from the audience, something
Mhm.
like that. That's like you can kind of bounce around a little bit more, or kind of bring that up. I mean, it's definitely not. I'm kind of making excuses now, so it's not definitely not impossible. But yeah, that's probably one that I could have asked about. And then to answer your question about the breakdown, I mean, I think this is one thing that like you do. I love your channel, right? Because you serve the Hispanic community, and I think all of these companies really underserve, the Hispanic community and all of the drivers who are English as second language. Like you talked about with delivery, like the buying and selling of accounts is a huge issue for the drivers in your community. And so, like my blog for like we did an annual survey. It was like 1,000 drivers on my blog, for example, but it's like a written survey, right? So if you learned English as your first language, it's easy. If it's if you don't write and read, like if I had to do a survey in Spanish, I would do horrible. I probably wouldn't fill it out, right? And so think it is. If you look at the company though, right? Uber, really launched, Uber Espanol, right? So it's like Uber X drivers with Spanish speaking drivers. And so you can go out and take rides and just like look at your delivery drivers. And obviously in the major cities, you see, if I had to guess, I think it's definitely over 50% minority drivers or drivers who are English as second language on both rideshare and delivery. And so I think the companies do a very poor job of sort of kind of catering to those
Mhm.
drivers. Doing obviously video is much easier. Spoken word is much easier to understand. Even in English than it is written, right? If it's your second language, it's easier to sort of speak than it is to write. So yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for the companies to do better. So I mean, I guess from a format perspective, video is nice too, right? Because everyone can kind of see or watch or see a translation. So
Part of the situation, and
mhm.
the perception, I think, and that is why I think that is important, this type of conversation, and to connect with Risher Guy and with other
Yeah,
channels. I'm going to be in August with Pedro in Denver. He's have this event. He invited
cool.
me, and
Yeah.
I'll be there. And I'm
Yeah,
so
we're helping promote the event. So I think we're sending Sergio out there, and it should be good. So
I'm
anyone listening, definitely check out GigCon in Denver. Get to meet Luis and
we,
Sergio.
we'll be there, and I'm so happy because of the connection that we are making,
Yeah.
because the language barrier affect drivers in the Hispanic community. They didn't know about this type of event and this type of
Yeah.
situation, and gathering, and to me is, I feel like it's a responsibility to be there
Yeah.
and
Well,
connect with the
and I mean, to be
information.
frank, Luis, I think like honestly, like probably like folks who don't speak English as well, I think they are at a bit of a disadvantage, right? Because all of the apps, all the people at these companies are designing it, for folks that speak English, right? So
Hmm.
it's not any of their fault, but they're at a bit of a disadvantage. But one of the things that I think is so powerful about these apps, like doing a delivery, for example, like you don't, or even picking up on Uber or Lyft, like you don't need to speak English, right? So it's sort of
Hmm.
like one of the great work opportunities where, I remember when I landed my first time in Hong Kong and I had the Uber app like many years ago. And I was like, oh God, where the hell do I go? What do I do? I just opened the Uber app and selected a driver. He didn't speak a word of English, but I could type in English, the hotel I was going to, and it gave me directions where to pick up. And so that is like what I think is really cool about technology is that, it might put you at a disadvantage, right? If the designers and the people working at the company aren't thinking about you, but it doesn't mean that, you're still completely like the transaction can still happen, right?
Yeah.
So that it is a good opportunity there.
I've been watching the channels and different
Hmm.
YouTube channels, and the conversation is way different. And one of the
Mm,
things that I've been trying to see is what is the opinion of you and other drivers about this type of situation, that for instance, in my case, every 10 emails that I receive,
mhm,
9 deactivated accounts.
Well,
So
are you saying
the
9 out of every 10 emails you get is a deactivated driver?
deactivated drivers,
Wow.
and that is
Yeah.
something that, and I want to connect with you in that issue. So what is your take on that,
Yeah, that,
of that issue?
so
And it's not like about the interview, but
yeah,
I want to take the
for
moment to
sure.
to see what is your take in that situation.
Yeah, so I would say, what I would call unfair deactivation, right? Because sometimes, let's be honest, like some drivers should be deactivated, but let's talk unfair deactivations, right? Where customer complained, or they're trying to get free food or a free ride or whatever, or you have too many, false complaints, but you didn't do anything wrong. Is definitely, I would say has always been a top 5, maybe on rideshare, maybe even top 3. issue for drivers over the past 10 years. I think unfairly being deactivated just because, people start relying on this income, for all the negatives about the gig economy. I've always said, I strongly believe the positives outweigh the negatives, right? Like, why else are 3 million people doing DoorDash, 2 million people driving Uber? Like, there's plenty of things that suck about, working in the gig economy, but go work at McDonald's for 40 hours a week and come back and tell me what you like better.
Yeah.
And we can talk. But I think the deactivation is so tough just because there are a lot of unfair deactivations. And frankly, like for the companies, I think it's cheaper for them to just find a new driver than to
Hmm.
deal with like he said, she said. And I think that sucks. I think that, the companies like have a bad history of looking at drivers as like a number on a spreadsheet or a dot on a spreadsheet. And they're like, oh, we
Yeah.
lost 100, maybe 50 of them shouldn't have been deactivated, but it only costs $100 for us to find a new driver. Let's just get rid of them and, they can figure it out. And I think that sucks for someone who spent, years, doing DoorDash and, maybe thousands of trips. And so, I think that the deactivation issue is one. It sounds like, a much bigger, I mean, it's a big issue for everyone, but maybe it's even more of an issue for folks in your community and folks that you're talking to. So I think that was, again, I don't think I actually asked Tony about unfair deactivations on delivery services, but that might be another good topic to, ask the company about.
And of course, it's difficult because in the interview, and I know that you make I count the question, and you made some questions, you made it like 3 times, 2 times to get the
Well,
answer. I know that.
so what's funny, Louise, right? I have gotten a few good, so I've interviewed Dara a few times and I interviewed Lyft's president and I had Chris, the president of DoorDash. So, I've done a lot of, so this is like my sixth or seventh, executive. I mean, these guys are paid. I mean, Tony Shu is worth $1 billion, right? So these guys are very well, they've done a lot of interviews. They're very well trained. So there are certain things like the first thing I remember I picked up is that like, you always have to imagine what they're going to answer and have a follow-up ready. So a lot of times you'll see that like I've got a question, but then I need to ask one or two more follow-ups, right? Because it's like, okay, I know what they're going to answer. Let's like, they know what I'm going to ask. They know what they're going to answer. Let's dig deeper into that. Cause that's kind of how you start getting the real answers, right? Like, hey, why doesn't DoorDash pay drivers enough? Okay. He knows I'm going to ask something like that. And then it's like, all right, what's the next question that I'm going to ask about this topic? That's where you start to get, kind of like the juicy nuggets, the real information, what he actually thinks.
Do you believe that in 2023, DoorDash is a company that you can work full time or half time? What is your take on that?
Yeah.
Because a lot of drivers are taking this full time,
Yeah.
and as it's hard in this
Yeah.
industry. What is your opinion?
Yeah, and I mean, I think again, DoorDash and delivery, they've always released a lot of. We have an interesting article on our website called DoorDash Statistics, and I remember Tony said this in the interview that 90% of Dashers do 10 hours a week or less, and they've actually always, delivery has always had 90% of drivers doing, basically part time. With RideShare, it's more like 60 to 70% do 20 hours a week or less, right? Because with delivery, there's very predefined peak demand times, right? People eat at breakfast, lunch, dinner. Sundays we know are pretty busy, right? Like holidays, special events, bad weather, right? People like to order in, right? So it's sort of like the times that people order food or high demand are very well defined. That's why DoorDash has always from day one used more of a pre-scheduling system, right? Where you have to book your shifts in advance, right? It doesn't work like that on Uber and Lyft. On Uber and Lyft, you can log in whenever and wherever you want because people always need to go places,
Yeah.
with rideshare, and they're willing to pay more for it, right? Like, would you pay more for a ride for yourself across town or for your burrito, right? Like if you got to get home, you'll pay for a ride for yourself. But if you have to eat and it's $50 to get your burrito delivered, right? Like surge pricing on New Year's Eve, you're gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna skip food. I'm gonna order, I'm gonna eat leftovers, right? You have a lot more alternatives. And so I think to answer your question directly, like I've always thought delivery was not a great option for full time. Obviously, some people have to do it, some people like doing it, but I think if you really want to maximize your earnings, I think there's no doubt you can make more money doing rideshare than you can with delivery. And then obviously, if you're doing full time and you have to work 40 hours instead of picking the most profitable 20 hours to drive, now you have to start driving Tuesday at 3 p.m. When you're kind of in between that lunch and dinner rush, or maybe you have to drive late nights. where there's stoners ordering ordering food or whatever, right? There's less volume, right? Because you're gonna get like a $12 cheeseburger instead of the family like me. When I order DoorDash, it's like $80 worth of food, right? And obviously a higher tip for that. And I might order from further away and I'm willing to pay more, right, to make that happen. More families. So I think it is pretty tough, but not impossible. I mean, 5 to 10% of DoorDashers are out there, probably doing 20 to 40 hours a week or more. But just structurally, I think it's very tough to do food delivery full time. If you are going to do food delivery, I would think about like, hey, if there's a reason you don't like doing rideshare, I think you can always make more with rideshare. But let's say there's a reason you don't like rideshare, Instacart is a good one, right? Because the demand is all throughout the day, right? People are ordering groceries in the morning, some are at night, some are during the day, all different hours, weekends, right? Or maybe package delivery or, Walmart. Like you kind of have to have a few other options where ideally, like the demand is at a little bit different times, right? So that you have more profitable hours to work.
And the response of the apps is a reward for the
Mhm.
drivers to earn more, but we know that it is difficult. The demographic of the rewards, like a top dasher, like acceptance reset
Yeah.
option, earn by time. That is the
Mhm.
new thing. The new thing. In the end, I believe, and I don't know if you follow me with this, I believe that that is something that works demographically,
Mhm.
but not in every city because of the
Yeah.
difficult in some places that is to get to that qualification of being a
Yeah.
top dasher. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest, I've always been skeptical of any program that the companies offer, like Top Dasher, gold program, silver, right? And the reason is that if you think about it, there's
Kryptonite.
always there's a bit of an inherent tension, right? Between, and I talked about this with Tony, right? And like this is the one area where actually I don't think he did a great job explaining. And I was like kind of disappointed with his answer when we were talking about, hey, as an individual dasher, what do I care about? I want to make the most amount of money. I want to drive as few miles as possible. I want as big of tip as possible. And asking me to like go the extra mile to make DoorDash look good, what does that get me? Right. Like, I think you need to reward drivers and pay them when they're going the extra mile. Right. I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons why I actually like earn by time. It's because, like, all right, now you can kind of, take your time. If the
Mm-hmm.
food's not ready, you're still getting paid. Right. Um, and so I think that the gig economy, one of the things that I like is that there's so much variability. If you are a hard and smart worker, there's no doubt you should be way above average. We talked about Sergio, for example, and when he goes out and drives Uber in LA, he'll earn $40 to $50 an hour before expenses. I meet other drivers who are doing $10 to $20 an hour. What is it that they're doing differently? He knows the patterns. He works hard. I mean, we do, we sort of started offering these coaching sessions to drivers and we didn't make much money off of them. But we've sold like 3 coaching sessions in 3 years. And every single driver who takes one with Sergio is like, oh my God, I doubled my income from last week to this. Right. And so it's like a lot of these drivers are like, not that great. They're not thinking really hard, like, hey, I'm trying to invest things now, or I need to like if you're in the top 10%, like not everyone can be top 10%, right? And that's just the reality, right? And so I think a lot of these programs are really trying to smooth out the averages, right? Like earn by time is basically saying like, hey, let's everyone come in here. We're not going to have anyone that makes only $5 an hour. We're not going to have people making 30. We want everyone making $16 an hour, during active time plus tips, right? If you want, we can really get into the weeds because I think this is a big trend happening across all the gig economy where basically they want you to have as much flexibility as possible when you're booking shifts and you cancel a
Mm-hmm.
shift whenever you want. But at the same time, they don't like DoorDash doesn't want you to go out and earn $100 one day and then $0 the next day. They would rather you earn $50 today and $50 tomorrow, right? And so that's really what all of these companies are trying to do. And so if you kind of understand that, right, if everyone goes out and does, dash by time, earn by time, then everyone's going to earn that average, right? And so it really, like, a lot of these programs, frankly, like not hurt, but they're not designed for the top drivers. Like if you're trying to be in that top 5 or 10%, you probably want to stick, more to like earn by order, right? Where you really can understand, the patterns and like, hey, like I talked with this about Tony, like, hey, aren't there certain restaurants to avoid? Like, hell yeah, there's certain restaurants to avoid. He wouldn't say this, but like Arby's or, whatever, like are the notorious ones in your area, right? Like, I mean, I think Walmart was kind of getting thrown under the bus there for a while too, right? With like the shopping and the pickups and, so it's like there's definitely certain certain, right? And if you're a savvy driver, you start to learn that and realize that, like, hey, if I don't accept this order, like, let some new driver take that order. They're going to take longer. They're going to make less because of that. And I'm going to make more. That's how you get to be above average.
Expectation, result. That's something that came to my mind. I think
Well,
that
and
a bunch
also
of
too, I mean, I think I can't remember if I touched on this in the interview with Tony or not, but I think most drivers, like half of all drivers out there, are not on YouTube. They're not on forums. They're not on Facebook or WhatsApp. They're just like out there doing their thing. You know what I mean? They're just out there
Mhm.
driving for Uber. They're out there delivering. And so when they see something like earned by time come in, they're like, oh, this sounds pretty good. You know, like I don't have to worry about this or that. Like they just like it's like delivery is the easiest job in the gig economy. You pick up food and you go drop it off at someone's house. Like, it couldn't be any easier. I kind of joke and call it pretty dummy proof, right? And so if you can make that part, obviously there's a lot that more that goes into it. And, if you're a really top driver, you can start making it very complicated. But let's say to do it the dummy proof way, you make $15 an hour. To do it Sergio's way, if you only earn $20 an hour, that's only 33% more, but it is, I don't know, it might be more than 33% more work because it's so easy to do it the dummy way. You know what I mean? So that's
Yeah,
sort of where,
I
like,
get
hey,
it.
if you're one of the drivers, that wants to keep it simple and do that, that's totally fine. Like, that's kind of, that I commend anyone who wants to do it. If you
And
want to like go above and beyond, though, you got to be ready to like, work hard and figure out the system.
myself, I have three examples. One time
Yeah.
I was in this restaurant and I was with talking. I was talking to this lady, an old lady doing DoorDash, and
Hmm.
we start talking and we talk about one area called Hoffman,
Hmm.
and I mentioned her. I don't go to Hoffman. It's too far away. After the
Yeah.
bridge is far, and she told me, "Oh no, I always take orders from for that area because those people are so good." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Wow, she's not doing this for the money. She's doing this for
Yeah.
another reason." Another example, I was in Chick-fil-A.
Well, and I think to interject, I mean, some people, I think everyone's doing it for the money, but you're right. Some people are more motivated. Like, some people are just good people and like, oh man, I
Mhm.
want to take this person there. I want to take this order there. Or, like, they really need food. And, they're kind of willing. Like, you kind of have to be a cutthroat driver. Like, if you want to make the most amount of money, you might get a request, like, especially with rideshare. They're like, wow, you want to go way the hell out there? I'm not going to get a ride back. You got to call another Uber. That's like a horrible experience for the customer, but you might have to do that one out of every 20 times if you're really a cutthroat driver. And everyone's on a spectrum, right, of where they fall is all. Who's the second driver?
The second was in Chick-fil-A. I was in Chick-fil-A,
Hmm.
and there was this an old guy as well, and he told me, "I'm doing deliveries of because I want to help the community."
Yeah.
He was in the army, and he
Yeah.
want to help people that that was in the army as well, and that
Yeah.
was he thought. And the third example that I have was this lady that took me from is RideShare. RideShare, my kid is screaming all over. This RideShare girl, she told me, I take every order. I
Yeah.
go outside to work and I take
Yeah.
everything that the app send me because I just want to earn money. Different thought. She don't even,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, she don't care about YouTube. She just go outside and
Yeah.
take every order, every ride.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you came to our Curbivore conference. We sort of had a driver, on stage who was like that. And I've liked doing interviews in the past with drivers who are sort of offline. Like, I call them the offline drivers, right? Because they kind of bring a different perspective. I don't necessarily agree or think it's a good or bad thing, but there's definitely a lot of different, that's sort of why I always take issue with people who are saying, DoorDash doesn't pay enough, or they, this offer is too low. Like, I guess, like, to me, it's like, hey, obviously, it's fine, we can play, everyone wants to earn more money, but at the same time, like, no one's making you do it, right? So it's like, hey, we can want improvements, we can want them to pay more, right? And if you can go get 1,000 drivers to go on strike and protest with you, then you're sort of showing that maybe they should pay more. But at the same time, right, like, the companies they're not forcing you to work, right? And there's a lot of other kind of not so great work opportunities. And so, kind of, to me, it's more about like, hey, anyone that wants to do DoorDash, let's help them do the best they can, make as much money as possible. totally fine to vent, here and there. But like overall, like I am not a fan of telling people not to do something, right? Because it's like you don't know their situation. I don't know. Maybe they're a new driver, right? And so that's sort of where I don't know. It gets a little tricky, right? Like asking the questions around like, why doesn't DoorDash pay enough? Well, I mean, for some people, it does pay enough, right? Like, so
Yeah.
obviously, like if you ask Sergio, there's certain orders, that he would never take that other people would take. And so I just like I guess what I would rather show is that like, hey, if on my like for example, like I would always tell someone like Sergio, right? Like, hey, you don't need to tell someone not to take this order. Say like, hey, I try to average $2 per mile, and on my last 25 deliveries, I've gotten $2 per mile payout. This order came in at $1 per mile payout. So for me, it wasn't worth it. And then now that viewer or now that DoorDasher knows what's possible. They're like, wow, in this
Mm.
city at this time, I can do $2 per mile. And so now I can make an informed decision. Should I take this order, that's paying lower at $1 per mile? And maybe they're like, I don't know, I'm kind of bored. Or maybe I only need one more order to hit my goal and then I can be done for the day. I
Hmm.
probably would take a low, you know what I mean? So it's
Maybe
sort
the
of like,
mileage,
as
maybe the mileage is not good, but it's taking me to my house. So why
yeah,
not?
exactly. As long as you're informed, I guess that's to me the biggest, the biggest thing.
I think after talking to you, and I have one more issue that I
Sure.
wanna know what is your opinion about that situation. After watching the interview and speaking to you, what I what I have, what I keep of these two conversations is that DoorDash and Uber and Grubhub are companies that this is what I have for you. That's
Hmm.
their what they think. This is what I have for you. If it
Yeah.
works for you, take it. If it doesn't work for you, don't take it. You are
Yeah.
free to just leave it like that. You are going to receive $2 orders, and $8 orders, but that's it. I mean, don't ask us more because
Yeah.
that's it. But in that thought, we have two situations, two cities that are fighting. One is California with the Prop
Hmm.
22, and the second one is New York.
Yeah.
We've been watching and looking all these news and what is going on with DoorDash, Grubhub, Uber, the the uh, the
The
amount that
legislation.
the
Yeah.
legislation. What is your take on that? Because it
Yeah.
is, for example, California. Okay, it's like Houston in
Hmm.
in some way. Like you go out with the car and make the delivery, make the ride share. But Manhattan and and
Yeah.
New York is difficult. We have these guys working with the bikes,
Yeah.
snow, rain,
Yeah.
sun, accidents, danger. It's the jungle out there.
Yeah.
So you think, well, this company can give you that. Why do you have to try to receive that amount of money and fight?
Yeah.
Just if you don't like it, just leave it. But after that, I think. I'm sorry about my French. I think who is going to work that hard, but those guys. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not the same. That is a hard work. They deserve more money because it's not the same situation. Houston, New York,
Yeah.
LA, New York. It's not the same. So, what is your take on those type of? Because
Sure.
I don't know what to think about that.
Yeah, so I'm a fan of sort of what I would call a pay floor, right? I mean, like, traditionally, right, employees have had minimum wage, right? Because like a lot of companies took advantage of workers or, they sort of so I like sort of there being some skin in the game. I don't like the idea where companies can just go and hire 100,000 delivery people and there's only 50,000 jobs and you are only busy half an hour, right? Like I think that is, not a great system, right? So anything that sort of guarantees some kind of minimum I think that concept makes a lot of sense, right? And I think like with the delivery situation in New York City, right? Like obviously drivers have been complaining in New York and other cities that they're not making enough money. They went out, they talked to legislators, they got this, bill passed, and now they're going to get paid $18 per hour minimum wage plus tips, which is I think a lot. The same organization said they used to be at $7 an hour, right? So this is more than, and I think that was including tips. So I think this is going to be like a 3 to 4x increase for them basically, right? And so if you kind of go that, if you're just like sitting there bitching about it, I don't know. I mean, it's like if you can't get other people on your side, right? Like I don't know, someone's always going to complain, right? But like in
Yeah.
the situation in New York City, there's 70,000 delivery drivers, like you said. A lot of them do it on e-bikes, and it's dangerous, and there's snow, and it's a pretty tough job. A lot of immigrants are doing this job. And so it's a pretty tough job. And they went out and they kind of fought and formed this organization and talked to legislators, and they got this passed. So I feel like I think that's pretty hard to argue with. I agree with you. They 100% deserve it. I think to me, the key thing is understanding that there are going to be potentially trade offs, right? Like now, if you're guaranteed to make $18 an hour plus tips, and you were making $7 an hour before, that's going to mean they're going to have to pass those costs on to customers, or they're going to have to make less of a profit. DoorDash has never, or they had like one quarter where they were profitable. So you can imagine they're going to start charging customers more, right?
Hmm.
And if they charge customers more, people like me with a family, we're going to order less. It's pretty
Yeah.
simple math. Now, as an individual, a driver, it may not affect me, but like over time, like one potential downside is that there could be, less orders, less opportunity in the future, right? I think
Because
that's pretty, I
DoorDash
don't,
and Uber, they're not gonna put money from their pockets there.
oh,
They're
they don't
going.
have any money. So where are they gonna take it if it's pretty simple math, right? And so I'm not saying, I just want people to understand what the trade-offs are, right? Like everyone likes to live in a world where they're like, oh, we'll get paid more, customers will keep ordering like crazy, and DoorDash that's not reality, right? So this is the math. And then number two, right? So DoorDash is already, the most, I would say restrictive, right? Because you have to schedule in advance. And obviously if it's busy, they'll let you dash now, or, if it's busy, they'll let you extend your shift, right? But like remember what I said with Uber and Uber Eats, it's not like that. You can log on whenever and wherever, but DoorDash is already kind of restrictive. And so if they now have to pay $18 per hour, they can't let you dash at times that aren't going to be busy. And they sort of already do this, but I imagine that they'll have to be even more strict, right? Maybe in the past, if you accepted, right, like as part of Top Dasher, you have to accept whatever, what is it, 7 out of 10 or whatever it might be, right, to stay in the Top Dasher. Maybe everyone is going to have to accept 7 out of 10, right? Because now,
The
if
new
you're not accepting
rewards.
orders
Yeah, the
and they're
new
paying you and to just sit there, maybe it's 9 out of 10, right? And so I don't know exactly what that will look like, but I mean, again, it kind of makes sense that they're going to have to be a little more restrictive. And so to me, I actually think the trade-off is worth it, right? Like if you get guaranteed a minimum pay and then there's a little bit more restriction, I think that's worth it for a lot of drivers. Now, no one is making below that floor, right? In California, they do it a little different because it's during active time only, right? So it's when you accept a job until the time you deliver. So it's kind of like earned by time, to be honest, right? Whereas in New
yeah.
York, they're kind of also now compensating you for that downtime, right? So if I'm DoorDash, I'm going to have to really minimize that downtime because now I have to pay for it, right? And so that's good because there won't be an oversaturation of drivers, but maybe it means that, hey, that new driver who just got to America and wants to work, like DoorDash is very, they're not hiring any new drivers for the next year, for example, right? Because they have too many so maybe if you're already in, you're good, but if you're a new driver looking for opportunity, if you get laid off, you might be screwed, right? So I think it's just important for people to understand the potential trade-offs. And there's a lot of good examples actually, like in New York City, they actually did this for Uber and Lyft drivers, right? So you used to be able to log on whenever and wherever. They did a true minimum wage for Uber and Lyft drivers. And now Uber and Lyft drivers have to select their shifts in
Hmm.
advance, just like DoorDash, but they do make more money. And so I think in that situation, drivers lost a little bit of flexibility, but it's still more flexible than McDonald's, and they get paid more. So I think in that case, it was worth it. So I think in New York City, I do think it'll be a good thing for Dashers, but there may be some small strings attached. So we'll see how it goes, but I do think it will be worth it.
Before we wrap it up,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna edit my bad English in the
All right,
in the
perfect.
interview. But before we wrap it up, you spoke with Dara, you spoke with Naf Chavda from
Yep.
Spark, Tony Shu, the president of DoorDash. After getting those interviews and those conversations, and after listening to what I share about the community worries and what they are really thinking about, well, what they're really, I don't know what they're really thinking, but what I feel about
Oh, I'm sure you know.
the perception that
Yeah.
I have because I read the emails,
Yeah.
the comments. The question is this: the Hispanic community right now is fighting against those guys who are taking the orders using a bot, and then we have like a bunch of new drivers using these accounts, and a bunch of drivers that they want to work full time, but they're not getting enough money. And this is the fight that we are having right now. A final message for them, something that you can share with them after, because if I can give you an example, after listening to your interview with Tony and with the CEOs and Dara and Neff, this is a half-time activity, not a full-time. That's what they send, the message that they send. That's what that's my take. What is yours?
I mean, well, think about it from the company's perspective, right? Like, it sounds a lot better to say, like, hey, come work for DoorDash, do 5, 10 hours a week, make some extra money, pay for a date, pay for school, right? Like, do this on top of your income. It sounds a lot better to say that than like, hey, come work your ass off for 40 to 50 hours a week, brave snow, brave crazy drivers in New York, do it on an e-bike. We're not going to provide you insurance for your bike or yourself if you get hit by a car. Like, what message sounds better, right? Like, to be frank.
The unions.
So, but I mean, I do think it's a good point in that, to me, I appreciate you kind of pushing back in the areas, because I do think kind of like, I think the companies, like what, us talking right now for an hour, I think what's really important to you and your drivers in your community is basically anything that's like, it needs to be a even a fair playing field, right? Like people that are using bots, people that are, trying to get, even if it's customers trying to deactivate drivers, like I think the companies need to do a much better job of getting rid of all the unfair advantages, right? And I think that's something that's, whether it's Uber or Spark, Amazon Flex, right? Like DoorDash, right? Like all the bad, I think the companies need to do a better job weeding out the bad actors and sort of promoting and helping the good actors, right? Like if you're a driver out there and, you're like buying and selling accounts and trying to scam the system, like you probably should be deactivated, right? But if you were deactivated over a false complaint and there's no one that you can talk to because you only speak Spanish and, all the support, agents speak English, but they're from the Philippines and, so their English isn't that great. It's like, it start making it a lot tougher. Although maybe you should try Spanish, because the Philippines, they do know a lot of Spanish. But so I think that's sort of where I think the companies really need to like kind of make it a level playing field and kind of do a much better job when it comes to like getting rid of the bad actors, making the deactivations a process, kind of the appeals process a lot more fair. I did an interview with the folks from the Seattle in Washington. They actually have a third-party deactivation center. So all of the drivers and gig workers in Seattle and the state of Washington fought for this. And I believe it's like one of the only places where if you are deactivated by Uber or Lyft or any gig economy company, within 2 or 3 days, they have to tell you why, what it was for, when, and where it happened. So you're like, oh, wow, that rider accused me of this. I've got a dash cam here and I can show them the footage right now within 2 days. And I can take that to a third party arbiter, all right, like an arbitration court that Uber and Lyft actually pay for indirectly. They pay the fees. There's fees on every ride. So customers sort of pay for it. And then you can kind of get reactivated onto the platform, right? And so it's like, those are the things where, hey, I wish the companies would do a much better job of it. And if they're not, there's drivers, it's going to take a lot longer, but, I think there's drivers that are out there and groups that are out there, sort of fighting and advocating for that. So that's sort of why I like when the drivers are pushing for things, like places like New York City and, Seattle. There's a lot of things that, I think every driver cares about, making more money, not being deactivated unfairly and, things like that.
Me connecting with you, I think it's a step in the right direction with for the Hispanic community. Cool. Promote your channel.
Yeah, there
Harry,
are
please.
definitely a lot of ways to follow us, and I will say, Luis, you better watch out. We're testing a lot of Spanish content right now, so we're been inspired by you.
Thank you.
So we're testing some Spanish content. Don't worry, on video and stuff like that. But so we've got a nice email list. That we've got 80,000 subscribers, and we send out a new article every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we do a news roundup over the weekend. weekend. And then we have our live shows too, which are really popular. Sergio and Chris do Show Me the Money Club, mainly focus on Uber and Lyft topics on Tuesdays. And then Wednesdays, I believe we do our Money Hungry, which is more of a delivery focused show, which I know you've been on in the past. So both those shows are growing. Basically any box on the internet, if you type the RideShare guy, and we've got a lot of stuff out there for you. So appreciate you having me on, Luis.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Harry. And well, sorry, I received I have the WhatsApp open and I'm going to cut this. Thank you for watching this interview. Please follow the RideShare guy. You're going to get a lot of value from him and his team that is huge. And of course, I'm going to see you in the next video. I am going to say this in Spanish. Gracias por vernos. No dejen de seguir a The RideShare Guy. Y por supuesto van a obtener mucha utilidad, mucho valor en su contenido porque tiene a un equipo gigantesco compartiendo todo tipo de información. Esta fue una conversación muy enriquecedora para mí y quien quita, mañana voy a estar yo haciendo esa entrevista a ese personaje que usted quiere, con el que usted quiere hablar y pues RideShare Guy nos puede ayudar a hacer esa conexión en el futuro. Así que bueno, muchísimas gracias, Harry, y nos vemos en la siguiente entrevista.